Welcome to the LTC Peregrine DadCast. We are here every week, not as a healing circle, not to tell you how you should grieve, but we are all here to say that we're on the journey with you. You are not alone. And there is no healing from this, but there are tools that we can find together. There are tools that have been tried and true that help us cope and endure and survive this. And so today I have two esteemed co-hosts joining me, Dave Roberts and Jeff Kamen. Please introduce yourselves again, and just for new people who are finding us, a little bit about your background and why you're here.
Jeff, I'll defer to you.
This is my 15th year of being a member of the club which nobody wants to belong to, the club of parents, specifically dads, whose children have predeceased them. I lost Nathan 15 years ago. He was 41. He was brilliant, compassionate, caring, charismatically handsome, humble, and an alcoholic. And guess which part won? Yeah. So that forced me to enter the club that nobody wants to belong to. And this adaptation by Henry creates a space in which everyone is safe and has an opportunity to share what they've been through and what techniques, strategies, and adaptations have emerged from the suffering. And remember, it's not just like in my case, my kid went off a 19-story building to his death in Chicago. Some members of this group have lost infants. Others have lost young adults standing on the corner waiting to cross the street, and some drunk comes by and takes their life immediately. So it's this broad spectrum of suffering. And from my point of view, the loss of a child is the single worst experience I've had in my life, but that's common to those who have had the experience because it defies the laws of the universe, the laws of nature. There's this great story, and I'm a broadcast journalist for more than half a century, so I go off with the mouth too much, but I'll wrap it up. The seeker climbs the mountain, finds the feet of the great guru and says, "Give me peace." And the guru looks at the seeker and says, "Grandfather dies, father dies, son dies, grandson dies." At which point the seeker is enraged. He says, "I come to you for peace, and you give me death." And the guru says, "Okay, let's start again." Grandson dies. At which point the seeker suddenly receives illumination in his heart and his mind. The suffering of loss of the child is so much more intense because it violates the natural order of the universe. And the odds are, if you're watching this, you have been plunged into this club nobody wants to belong to because the only access point is that you've lost your kid at some age. Could be just before birth, could be age 20, could be age 18, could be, in my son's case, age 41. But that child has been taken from you. The trauma is devastating. And we all have to learn how to rebuild ourselves after that. And that's one of the things we're here to do. We're like handholds when you're climbing something steep. Sorry, I talked too much.
It's good. Really good. Dave?
Yeah, my name's Dave Roberts, and I've been a peregrine I'm in my 21st year as walking a path of a peregrine. My daughter, Janine, and I called it transition from a physical existence into a spiritual one. On March 1st, 2003, she died of a very rare and aggressive form of cancer, 10 months after giving birth to my first granddaughter. At the time that she transitioned, I was employed as an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor for the state of New York. I had recently gotten my master's in social work. I had two other grown children, and all of the training, all of the background I had in the world, all the parenting didn't prepare me for walking the path I was compelled to walk. That path that I walked compelled me to take a look at everything that I stood for, my values, my attitudes, my beliefs. I had to decide which beliefs no longer served me, which beliefs I could keep and expand on, and which beliefs I could add. And to paraphrase the late Neil Peart, the late great drummer of the band Rush, I had to figure out what type of a person I wanted to be and the type of world that I wanted to live in. And that was the daunting part of the journey, and which is why grief in any sense is not a linear piece, because the work that I had to do was much more cognitive and restructuring my world, which took a great deal of several years, and also with the help of several people along the path, has allowed me to re-engage in a purposeful and meaningful life, and to help other individuals who are, as Jeff mentioned, members of a club that none of us ever thought we'd be a part of. And it has to echo what Jeff said, is burying a child before you is predeceasing you is unnatural. It defies the natural laws of the universe. And it was something that I always looked at other individuals who had lost a child and said, I feel badly for them, and at the same time, I'm glad it isn't me. Then it became me, and my whole perspective changed. And this is what has brought me to this point. My story continues to evolve. I continue to learn from everybody across the path, albeit young and old. And, I continue to be a work in progress.
As are we all. As are we
Yes.
all.
Beautifully stated.
Crucial to remember.
Jeff mentioned that I am the founder of the Lost Travelers Club. It is the club that we all want to belong to now that we are here. And it is, I'm Henry Cameron Allen, and my son released his spirit on the 14th of September, 2008. So September is a tough month for me on a number of levels. Not only is it the milestone marking the memorial of my son's passing, but it's also Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. So it's in my face 24/7 and has been from the beginning. And so what that has brought up in me is the feeling that when I was going through my first stages of mourning and shock and all of that, I was caught in a whirlpool, a downward spiral, as it were, because there was no word like widow or orphan that we could turn to universally anywhere in the world to describe who we were. Our sense of purpose through the window, our sense of self out the window, our sense of our own destiny, right? And those larger universal questions about why are we here? And how could a compassionate God allow for this kind of suffering, both of our children and of parents and grandparents and siblings and aunts and uncles and friends, communities left behind after a child leaves this world. And we've had these conversations before, and I'm a little bit different, and I want it to be clear that my perspectives are from my own biography and my journey, and that predates even becoming a parent, right? So we're all coming from the foundations that we're coming from. But I've sat with that question of this going against the laws of the universe and of nature. I've sat with this, of course I have, as we all have. And for me, it doesn't, with all respect to those who feel that way, to me, it doesn't hit me that way. To me, it was, in my situation with Cameron, there was no cause that we could identify that an 11-year-old boy would develop a tumor in his head the size of a summer peach that is only found in men over 45. There are no answers. There was nothing environmental at home or at school that would have triggered that. It's not a genetic kind of cancer, right? I'm a cancer survivor, and I didn't pass it on to him, but did I carry the guilt of it? Sure I did. Wondering, did I somehow genetically pass this on to him? But when people come to me and they say, it's the worst thing that can happen to a person. And I've said this before, or it's unnatural or against the laws of the universe. I sit here as a witness of my journey to testify it is natural because it happened. And there are no answers as to why it happened. There are answers for some people as to why it happened. For me, there are no answers. And so it was a natural course of events that were his destiny. It was his time. It was his way. That's not to minimize my suffering, although it does minimize my suffering. It does reduce my suffering and allow me to embrace and accept the mysteries that exist in this universe that we have no idea about, and that are influenced by culture, influenced by faith, influenced by our own biographies. And my biography has led to a very, very strong belief that death is not real. It is an illusion. I've been dreaming on this. I've been living on this for the better part of this past year. The quantum understanding of grief, quantum grief is what we're talking about. It's the unpredictability of grief. You cannot predict how someone is going to react. Maybe that's a good topic for today, is why are some people able to navigate this kind of grief over children in ways that I think it does make us all a little loopy. I mean, we're never the same as we were before the event. But it seems to me that there are some people who are able to break out of that whirlpool, and others have a harder time.
Sure. Well, the reason that I join you every Sunday is out of a sense of obligation and purpose, and you give me a venue for it. I needed every handhold I could find when Nathan James came and died, left his body. And it took me years to reconnect consciously with his spirit. But now he's ever present in my life and a source of reassurance about the totality of life and how important it is to be grateful for each breath and how empowering that is. But I had nobody who knew anything about this particular brand of insult. It's an insult. It's like being struck by somebody who walks past you with a powerful left hook and you're wondering why you're on the sidewalk. Now, that's if you got an adult kid. What you went through with your beautiful boy's long journey into transition, I don't know that I could have survived that had I been in your shoes.
And I don't know if I could survive your situation either. But, you know, the truth of the matter is we don't even have to think about that.
That's true.
Because we did survive. We have survived 100% of all the shit that life has thrown at us, including this. And what does that mean in the big picture? That means that anything else that's coming down the pike, no matter what age we are, chances are, the odds are really good that we are going to survive that too. And so what I've been able to do is, I think we all do in a way, and some people find it later in the journey. For me, coming up in a couple of weeks, it's 15 years of Peregrine. And that does, as you both know, bring with it some wisdom. We're not done. There's no destination here, right? It's a journey. It's always, we're at a different crossroads. But for me, I use that marker, September 14th, as a guidepost, as an affirmation of my own strength that I didn't realize I was capable of carrying, my own capacity to survive the unthinkable, my own capacity for pain management. There are so many positives that have come out of this. I'm not saying that I wish, you know, this on anybody, or I'm grateful that it happened on that level. But the golden things that have come into my world, including the two of you, including the broader Fellowship of Fathers Circle and the Lost Travelers Club and the Lost Traveler podcast and my theater work. None of it would exist had Cameron not left the planet when he was meant to. And that's a hard truth to face. How can we sit in gratitude over the worst thing that could ever happen to a father?
Because the gratitude isn't for the horror and the trauma, it's for the survival. That we find our ways to survive, and that we open our hearts, our generous hearts, consciously to reach out to others who find themselves suddenly thrown into this pit. That's why I'm here, and I thank you for the opportunity, Henry. It's not exclusively a Jewish thing, but I was brought up with this notion that to save one life is as to save the world. And I'm convinced that somewhere along the way, somebody's going to click on this podcast or any of your others who's going to be in desperate need, maybe even being suicidal themselves in the aftermath of the loss, and will suddenly say, these guys got through this.
Yeah.
What the better than me? I can do it too. And I want to be here for that guy.
Thank you.
I think, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just saying, thank you for saying that, because it's important to say.
Yeah, I think just to dovetail off of the gratitude piece, for me, I think it's gratitude, I think not only for my ability to survive or my innate ability to survive. And I think that sometimes tends to get overlooked, is that we need to have the will to survive before we can move through any challenge. And I think our will to survive and the need to that is so important. But the gratitude is also for people like you and now Jeff and anybody that has come into my life when they were destined to come into my life, that gave me another piece, gave me another tool, gave me the will to even take another step when I didn't want to. And I wake up every day with gratitude for the fact that I get a chance to as an adjunct professor of psychology, child life in retirement, I get to work with some great students who respond to me personally and respond to the teachings and who are engaged. I'm thankful for the family that I have. I'm thankful for the people in my life. And I tell individuals, don't feel sad for me 21 years down the road, because in spite of what's happened to me, in spite of the tragedy that has befallen me, I'm a blessed man because of what I have in my life. And that's the piece, is that I have gratitude for what I have, not for what I can't get back.
And that's exactly the point of the Lost Travelers Club, is to be that reflection, to say, guys, we know because we've been where you are. We have been at the edge of the abyss where nothing could possibly matter in life once this is plucked out of the equation. Our very fatherhood is plucked out of the equation. And I think for most, I'm getting a little emotional here because it's September, number one, but there are triggers that come at us very often. Some of them are when you share with someone that you're a peregrine, and the first question out of their mouth is, oh, do you have any other children? As if that would make it better or easier. How many, raise your hand if you've heard that question asked of you, right? It is so common. And this podcast, this DadCast, is not just for other peregrine dads. This is for those who love them. These are for their friends, their community, their coworkers, their family. This is for everybody. This conversation about quantum grief, meaning the unpredictability of grief. And I think I've coined that term. I've been looking and researching. Nobody's talking about it. That's not an ego trip. It's just, I'm delighted that this is coming through me, because I've always had this nerdy side of me that loves quantum theory and the different dimensions that are just now unleashing their mysteries and bringing things into more focus. But I really feel like grief is part of that story. And when we have this opportunity to come together as men, as fathers, how many of us have struggled with the question, am I even a father anymore? Can I even identify that way? My grandmother used to say, you're an artist if you're making art, right?
I have 3 living children.
Yeah.
All of them young, and was Nathan. He was first. I think it's important, at least for me, to underline an item which you raised earlier, that there's a craziness that's associated with that trauma. The sudden, in my case, the sudden loss of the child. But, I've been told 20 years before that I would get that phone call in the middle of the night from a cop I'd never met, who would ask me the question, did you have a kid named Nathan? That's how I would learn it. It's exactly the way I learned that he'd gone off the 19th story of the balcony. And, these days, he shows up when I'm at my laziest and he'll say, hey, get your ass out on the road, walk, go to the gym, do the right thing. I'm busy here. And I hear this laughter and I know, okay, you got me again. Thank you. Because that was the relationship we had. He was this rising champion martial artist, straight A student, and then somebody introduced him to alcohol when he was 16. And he had the genetic predisposition. And like so many others who have the genetic predisposition, he slid rapidly down the rabbit hole of alcoholism. And then he rose up again and then down again. And that's, unfortunately, that's a common experience for alcoholics. His survival, for as long as he survived, was impressive, but it also shredded everybody who loved him along the way on a daily basis, which is so remarkably different from your experience with Cameron, the child. See?
Well, and yet his passing shredded a whole community of people who loved him too. So there are those common factors, each one is unique, each one is different. But you're right. I think this sort of insanity that takes hold, it comes out in very unique ways depending on your biography and depending on the other challenges that you've had. This now is the pinnacle. This is the measuring stick I use against everything else. There are other crappy things that have happened in my life, but this, nothing can hold a candle to. And so that's my marker. That's my anchor that I always come back to. Dave, where does your journey affect your mental health? We don't talk enough about mental health, especially men's mental health in general, but specifically around this issue, we need to do better. We need to do more.
Yeah, I think for me, we asked the question, did I question whether I was still a father? I think like Jeff, I had surviving children. I had 2 surviving sons. My daughter, Janine, was the middle child. What I questioned was my overall effectiveness as a father as it related to dealing with her illness. And some of the things that went through my head, and this is what I call literally the insanity of grief, is I held myself accountable for several years for not being able to see the signs of her cancer sooner, which turned out to be an incurable form of cancer. Somehow I thought it was my job to have come up with this magical cure, had her go to another clinical trial. And I tried to say, well, you consider clinical trials. And no, she didn't. What she taught me is that she said, Dad, I'm going to live life on my terms, but I'm also going to die on my terms. She wanted to be with her family. We had an honest conversation around after Christmas. It was just me and her in the family room. And she said, Dad, I know I did a lot for Christmas this year, but I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year. And she knew she wasn't going to be here next year. So for me, it was questioning my overall effectiveness as a child, as a father, as a provider, as somebody who could not fix my family's grief, because every time I saw them cry or in distress, it reminded me that I couldn't fix what happened. So this is where I questioned everything about me as my efficacy as a father. And then I finally realized with help, with support, that I did the best I could given the hand of cards that was dealt to me. And now it's just time to move forward as best as I can move forward while carrying my grief, but moving forward to re-engage in life. As far as for my mental health goes, there were bouts of sadness that could have easily gone into depression. So essentially, and I probably struggled with transient bouts of sadness and certainly borderline depression early in grief. And I think I recognized that. And fortunately, I was with support and with at least being able to journal, I was able to get a handle on it. But God, it's for what had happened. And again, if we take a look at a human law explanation for what happened, human law can't explain why, in fact, we had to bury a child before our time. But sacred law, I came to learn, and particularly with the help of one brilliant interfaith minister who we both know, Patty Farino,
Yeah.
that in terms of sacred law, Janine needed only 18 years for her soul to assimilate the lessons that she needed to assimilate, to teach the lessons that she was destined to teach until she went on to her new existence. And she taught me that love truly does exist on the other side, and that we can transform that relationship and have an eternal bond with her in spirit. So that's, but for me, it was questioning my overall effectiveness as a father. And just wondering where I go wrong. And,
Yeah.
you know, that wreaked havoc with my entire identity as a parent. I had to grapple with that and come to terms with that. And that was the work, a lot of the work of grief that I had to do.
I think that's true for a lot of us, all of us.
Yeah. I'm the son of an electrical engineer who was a pioneer in his field. And when I was 8, he was struck down by polio, which almost killed him. He couldn't even get out of the hospital in Chicago to get back to New York for a full year. By the time I was 9, I was his personal assistant. And by having to do these relatively minor but increasingly responsible things, like when he got up on braces and crutches, I had to learn to be behind him. So in case he slipped, he couldn't fall backwards, crush his skull and kill him. And what that did was, among other things, it slid into my unconscious the notion that I was responsible for fixing everything. Well, guess what? That's not a good piece of programming for any kid. But I'm still grateful, and I still can't drive a nail cleanly. That's a real problem. But it took me a lot of years after Nathan left his body to come to grips with the declaration that it wasn't my fault. I know I'm supposed to be able to fix everything on the planet, but maybe not. Maybe not. I still find myself intervening in other people's stuff. I got in the way of an ugly fight that was starting to happen on a subway in DC a year ago. And that's just what evolved. I became more involved in other people's trauma, I guess, and I have to watch out for this, trying to somehow make up for the fact that I couldn't save my own kid.
Well, that's really an important point, because if you look at us as men, and I don't care where we come from, what part of the country or what part of the world, we were all spoon-fed fairy tales and superheroes from the time we were able to understand language. And the roles of men in society and the pictures of the hero, right? All of these things that we wanted to strive for. And of course, these are the things that we want our little boys, the way we looked up into our father's eyes, to look at us, right? As being able to handle everything, trusting us to handle everything, and to keep the monsters under the bed at bay. And when we can't do that, whether it's a bottle of booze or whether it's a cancer, then I think that it's our kryptonite. It was for me. It's what sends us off on this insane, meaning not sane, spin. And I still feel not as much after 15 years. They're not as intense, but the triggers will hit me on milestone days, Memorial days, birthdays, holidays. It could be the first day of school that he never got to, finish, right? That kind of a thing. Seeing kids his age graduating or having kids, or right, all of that. And there is always going to be, I think, that moment of mea culpa. My fault. There was a fault in me that caused that to happen.
Then actually, no, right. But
And
must have been.
It's not logical. It's not logical, but insanity is not logical. That's the whole point. And so once we get to a certain understanding and acceptance, I think acceptance is a really big word for us. To accept that it happened at all. This is my life. This is me. I'm not watching a movie. This isn't somebody down the street. This is me. Right. And I hear a lot of dads and moms too say that phrase, why me? Why me? Right. We fall into a victim role. Have we been victimized by outliving our kids? Yes, we are the victims of child loss. Yes, we are. In terms of self-awareness, my choice has been to focus on the victor in me versus the victim.
Mhm.
The victor that when somebody puts their hand on my shoulder and says, "Oh, Henry, you're only human," that voice that comes up in me that says, "Screw you. I'm superhuman. Thank you very much. I'm superhuman. You go through this, and then you come back and talk to me and tell me I'm human." And I say that to you, Jeff. I say that to you, Dave. I say that to every dad listening, every mom listening. When you have survived your child, you are superhuman. You are in the Justice League. You are in, and we cross into that. And I think everybody that I know has felt at some point this savior complex that I feel.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? Now I have the capacity to move the stones out of other people's paths. And I think this venue, this platform is part of that. And yet I really am trying to be sensitive to people who want to do it in their own pace, in their own way.
Yeah.
I'm going to move my own stone in my own time.
Yeah.
I don't want other people to come here and say, "I've got the way. This is how you do it."
No, that's guru stuff. And gurus, I don't believe in gurus. I don't have a guru because guru says, follow my path. That's the only path. Well,
That's
guess what? There's a
That's
lot of different roads to take to transformation of grief. And whatever road's going to work best for you, for that person, you take it. As long as that you're not hurting yourself or somebody else in the process, it's all good. Whatever road is going to work, you take. And I would agree. I think we are superhuman to survive what we have survived. But the thing is with the questions, why me questions, for me, that had to happen. And I think that's part of the grief process is to let those questions come up to realize that there is really no answer for why anything happened, that it was beyond our control to deal with what we had to deal with, even though we thought it was. But those questions have to come up because after a while, when those why me? Why did my daughter have to transition? Why did she have to get cancer? Why my family? Eventually, the only answer that would have satisfied me was having God or whoever is designate come down and say, "Dave, we made a mistake. We're giving you your life back." That would have been the only answer that would have made any sense. I knew it wasn't going to happen. So
right.
once I determined that there was no answer that was going to satisfy any question I had, I stopped asking the question. And guess what? When I stopped asking the questions, that's when clarity started to sit in terms of where I needed to go.
I'm a lifelong non-drinker. I'm a lifelong non-recreational drug user. And part of me just pounded my emotional chest saying, why me? Look, I didn't do any of that. Okay, it's not about me. Oh, sorry. That's an interesting moment of discovery that it wasn't about me. It was about his journey.
That's right. His journey. Yeah.
And I was only one part of that, and maybe a smaller part than I'd imagined.
I think it's normal, though, to reflect on the impact because we do feel it, and that has to be validated. We do feel it in the way that we feel it. We can't. I do think that healthy detachment is called for at certain key points in the development on the journey of grief. I do believe that the only way that I can do what I do in working with other people who have been through this in their way is that I have to detach not only from their experience, empathize with it, but not own it or absorb it, but also I have to detach from my own journey in order to be able to serve, to be of service to other people. I can be honest, I can be open, I can reflect back my experience, right? With the caveat that it is my experience, and that even people who shared that experience with me, other people in that circle, experienced it in a different way than I did, right? It's all valid. And so to have a platform where we can talk about this freely, which very often there are a few platforms for dads, to be able to say to one another and hold up a mirror of reflection, say, you know what, I had a completely different experience with that. But now what you're telling me, your story, that opens me up to other possibilities, right? And we can move those stones together in community. That's what the Lost Travelers Club is. It's about moving those stones off the path together. Nobody has to do it alone. Nobody is that strong. Not even me. You know, I can't, you both alluded to the people who have been there along your path that have helped you get to where you are. And likewise, I've had those angels along the path to point me in one direction or another, or even sometimes just to walk silently beside me. Sometimes that's enough.
I think it's important to allow for craziness.
Yeah.
And especially in the earliest moments of the loss, because whether it was the loss of a baby or a young adult, or across the whole spectrum of what can take the soul out of its body, there is this terrible trauma. And the day of my son's memorial service, I wore a suit of his clothes because I thought he should be able to attend. And I had no idea how offensive that turned out to be to some of the other people at the memorial service. And it took me a long time to get to understand that. So what we do inside the frame of our own solitary space is one thing. What we do in a communal space is another. And it doesn't hurt to be conscious and sensitive to all of that.
So let me ask
But
you a question. I have to ask you a question. For those people, and myself included, because I found myself in that situation before, when you're in a state of, you know, and I don't want to be derogatory about it, it's you know, of mental ill health or whatever we want to call it, you know, because I know people can interpret craziness and insanity as derogatory. That's not the intention in this conversation. And I think that it's when you're in a state where you are outside of your personal norm, how does one become so grounded and conscious about how they are affecting other people in their insanity? How do you navigate, you, Jeff, personally, how do you navigate the moments where you're not aware of how other people are receiving you? People are interpreting, you know, your insanity in one way or another, right? How much control do you have over that? And what do you do about it?
it took me months to forgive myself for upsetting others in that space. And that was okay too. That's the point I want to raise. If you are a recent survivor of loss of a child,
Peregrine.
please be forgiving of yourself for whatever you go through. Everything is acceptable absent cruelty. Anything that is not cruel to others, I prefer it or cruel to you either, but anything that isn't cruel is acceptable. And your knowledge of it will evolve in good time. Always remember this important and simple collection of words. It actually does get better. It does get better. Your primary mission is to survive this time. Hang on tight.
Dave, how about you? How do you become conscious and grounded enough to be able to control your own sort of out there moments?
I think one, there's a couple of things. One, if, one of the things is I'm fortunate, my wife will pretty much ground me if she thinks I'm getting just a little bit out of sync. So she will let me know, hey, you may want to rethink or take a look at what you just said. And, she'll remind me in terms of how I came off in a particular moment. The other thing is as a therapist, I've been ethically and morally and just part of my nature, I'm always into self-reflection after every interaction I have with a client. So I'll sit down and take a look and say, what did I do right? Was the message received? What could I have done better? So after every interaction, particularly in the early stages of grief, I would look and say, did I come across how I wanted to come across? So it was a commitment to me to be self-conscious of the fact that I still have limitations and I need to address those limitations and be aware of them and evaluate those regularly, and also be open to feedback from others that have my best interests in heart. So that combination helped keep me grounded in moments where I felt that I was a little bit off, I was a little bit off center, and that combination was really helpful to me.
One of the things that I've been studying to supplement my grief and bereavement counseling work is I've been studying polyvagal theory. You're familiar with the vagus nervous system? It's all connected and it controls everything from your eye blinking to your swallowing, to your breathing, to your muscle flex, to your digestion, right? It's all connected. The only aspect of that system that you can control is your breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And that will have an effect on your heart rate when you're having an anxiety attack. It'll have an effect on your digestion. It'll have an effect on every aspect of your nervous system, just to become conscious of your breath and to start practicing manipulating your breath, controlling your breath. And I know, Jeff, as a yogi, this is central to a lot of the work that you do. And so when we're feeling out of control, if we already know, even if we're out spinning out here and we already know that all those things are happening without any effort from us, but the one thing that we can control is our breathing, start there. It's going to affect every other aspect of your system. It's going to give you mental clarity to be able to come to a place of focus and groundedness. Get out into nature. Right? So many of us feel isolated in our grief and in our mourning, and we don't want to leave the house. Leave the house. Force yourself to go for a walk and listen to the bird song, listen to the crickets, listening to the babbling brook. All of that affects your breath. The ions in the air affect how you feel, how you think. You're part of nature. You're not separate from it. So what I would suggest is, if you feel like you're spinning off the planet, start with your breath. Get yourself to a place where you can breathe fresh air and really take it in and release it. Drop your shoulders an inch. You're going to feel a difference. Jeff, how does breath affect your ability to navigate the waters?
Every day, I spend some time doing this one. It's called alternate nostril breathing, and here is your 10-second tutorial. Close the nostril, breathe through the other one. In, switch, exhale, then back. Do that for a whole minute, and much to your surprise, things start to shift. You become more in control of things than you could have imagined before you did it. And there's the other thing. Yoga breathing is all through the nose, in and out. And it turns out it's really grounded in advanced science.
Yeah.
When you breathe in and out through the nose, it actually increases a whole bunch of subtle stuff. This isn't mystical. This is actual science. that benefits not only your lungs, but your brain. So even when I go to the gym these days, lifting weights, I consciously remind myself, do it through your nose. Watch what happens. I find I can handle more weight or more repetitions or both.
It affects your sleep too. You know, I find myself waking myself up snoring. And I know that nose breathing is so much better for the quality of sleep, which is very important to mental health. And so I force myself to close my mouth. There are some people who do tape their mouths closed. I couldn't sleep that way. So, but there are many techniques out there to affect your breathing. And I do believe there's good science behind it.
Oh, yes, and belief isn't even required.
Yes,
It's
right.
established objective fact, like up is up, down is down, things like that. This is one of those. And for me, the great joy of these kinds of techniques is that they become utterly reliable friends who are there just waiting, saying, hello, hello, how about doing the alternate nostril breathing today? Yeah, maybe? Oh, yeah, right. Okay, thank you. Take it in through the nose. Exhale gently through the nose. Watch what happens. You actually see and feel the change. And the business about the snoring, it isn't just socially problematic, but it's often an indicator of sleep apnea, which can shorten your time on the planet.
That's right.
And I've dealt with sleep apnea. I've been diagnosed with it. So I have a CPAP machine. So I'm used to sleeping with my mouth closed. And you know, so and I think, you know, to echo with Jeff, yeah, that's right, because undiagnosed sleep disorder, if you don't do anything about that, does shorten our life on the planet. So, and that's the other thing I've become more mindful of as I've gotten older, is how I treat my body and what I'm putting into it, and exercise. I used to tell people I used to treat my body like an amusement park and put all kinds of funny stuff in it.
Yeah.
Now it's like I treat it. I eat to live. I don't live to eat anymore. And you know, it's just a matter. It's made a difference as I've gotten older, where I feel like I have more stamina, and it's really improved my mental health and well-being just for making those lifestyle changes.
I'm the same way. When I left the States just 7 years ago, I was wearing a 44 waist. I'm now a 33. I was pre-diabetic. I had gout. I had fatty liver disease, and I wasn't a drinker. And it was all just, and I was eating whole food. I wasn't eating junk food, right? But there was something about the quality of the food that I was eating in America that was very different in Europe. The quality of the food was much, much better. I know it is, but it's a fact, not an opinion. And I've seen it in my body and in my mental health. I am convinced that changing my way of eating cured my depression. I have not had a day of depression. Have I had sadness? Have I had heaviness? Of course. I'm a peregrine. But the depression that would consume me is no longer in the equation. My blood pressure is normal. I have no risk of diabetes. I have no more gout. So again, here's something that you can control. The flip side of this, from a mental health level, that I struggled with was the feeling of guilt that if I made any attempt to change my state of mourning and grief that was so intense that in some way I was letting go of my child, I was forgetting them, or I wasn't investing enough of myself in honoring them. And another pet peeve of mine is when people come up to me and they say, oh, your son wouldn't want you to feel that way. Well, duh. But I mean, what does that tell me? But that assumes that you can change it. And oh yeah, well, no, he wouldn't want me to. I'm all better now. No, there are steps that you have to take. There are things that you have control over your physical and mental health. We know that the gut and the brain are connected. We know that the heart is in that equation as well. It's all part of the vagal system, right? And so there, my own experience allows me to say that if you just make one small adjustment, even if it's with the nasal breathing, or even if it's with adjusting your diet and getting rid of all the processed foods, right? Just go for whole food. Something as simple as that can start to change, not in a way that diminishes your grief, not in a way that makes you forget about your child, or that you're moving on in your life in any way erases the journey that you've been on, the suffering that you have carried till now and will continue to carry. Yes, it gets better, it gets easier, but it's never easy, guys. It's never easy. We all have our days. We all have our challenges. There are some days where it doesn't even occur to you because you're caught up in the rhythm of your life. And then darkness descends, you're in bed, and you're petrified because you didn't think about your child that day. And you feel overcome by guilt that, how can I, I don't want to forget even a moment.
My son's spirit will often appear and say, hello, excuse me, remember what the old teaching is? Life is for the fill in the blank. The word is living. Life is for the living. Stay connected to me. But if you want to do something that's additionally satisfying for me, live your best life. So here I am, I'm about to be 80 years old. I'm so blessed I don't take any prescription medications. I'm a newlywed. We've been married for almost 10 years. And I married a living embodiment of compassion and one of the best yoga teachers ever on the planet. So she has the body of a 30-something athlete and can pop into a headstand at age 7. She's also a retired doctor of Oriental medicine. So I really want to know what to do next in terms of expanding my health possibilities. All I have to do is ask, but then if I do that, I have to listen to it, and that requires work. And part of me is still an allergic to work teenager. And I got to discipline, say, shh, it's okay. Go take a nap. I'm going to do the work.
It's worth doing, I think, because striving for your optimal state of health, physical and mental, and they are connected, that allows you, for me, I can only say for myself, it allows me to live out my life in honor of my son.
Yes.
It gives me the wherewithal, the energy, the clarity, the momentum, the gas in my tank to be able to live in honor of my child, because he was my only child. I don't know. People ask, it's the other thing people ask me, oh, are you going to have any other kids? Well, no. No, because I wouldn't want any child to feel that they were a consolation prize in some way,
Not the only alternative, Henry. Consolation prize.
Well, listen, I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, I'm a director of children and write children's stories. I mean, I am involved with children, which was a really great act of courage on my part, to allow children back into my life. And I want to acknowledge that for anybody else who might feel that.
I would argue that an acceptance of grace.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, and the other thing I would also say, we're not only doing the work in honor of our children, we're doing it with them as well, because that's a part of integration of grief.
Yes.
We're doing it with them.
Yes.
They're living in us and through us. Absolutely. But if we're caught up in that vortex, in that stagnation, it's harder to see the forest for the trees. When you're in that dark forest, it's hard to see that there's any way out of it. And that's why we're here. I think that's a good point to end this episode on, is that we're here to walk you through the forest because we've been through the forest and now we're back in it for you.
All we're doing is walking each other home.
That's it. Ram Dass, one of my favorite authors, Ram Dass. We're just walking each other home.
Well, guys, join the club, right? This is the club that nobody wants to belong to, but damn it, we're here. So we might as well have a club, and might as well channel our grief into goodness with one another, for one another, with our kids who live inside us now and through us. And so join us. Go to losttravellersclub.club, and you can register for the weekly Fellowship of Fathers Circle. We have a touch base, and then we record the podcast. We are starting a mothership circle as well. We're talking about a sibling circle, an IS circle as well, and other projects. So get involved with the Lost Travelers Club. Again, we're not a healing organization because there is no healing from this, but what we are is an empowerment organization, bringing peregrines together to do some good in the world with our kids, with the spirits of our kids, and with one another in community. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Dave. And we will see you next week.
See ya.
See
Thanks.
ya.